Everyone in gold investing thinks they know what the scarce asset is. They'll tell you it's ounces, or grade, or jurisdiction, and for a long time, that framing worked. But if you've been paying attention since about 2018, really paying attention, you can feel that something has shifted under the surface, quietly, structurally, almost invisibly if you're still focused on drill results. The real bottleneck in North American gold today isn't geology, it's permission. Permission to crush, to grind, to leach, and most critically, permission to put tailings somewhere regulators will tolerate for decades. Once you see that, gold mills stop looking like supporting infrastructure and start looking like the center of the system. Welcome to JuniorMining.gold, the podcast where we dig deep into the raw, unfiltered world of building fortunes from the ground up. I'm your host, Dusty Nugget, the guy who's ridden more boom and bust cycles than a rodeo cowboy on a bull named Recession. If you're new here, we don't sugarcoat the grind. We expose the guts of the business, from solo hustles to empire-building shares. Before we dig into the dirt, this episode is brought to you by JuniorMining.gold. Are you tired of missing the boat on the next big discovery? JuniorMining.gold is your ultimate radar for the high-stakes world of small-cap mining. We track the drills, the assays, and the movers so you don't have to. If you want the edge in the outback, head over to JuniorMining.gold. Now, let's get to the gold. So, as I was saying, gold mills stop looking like supporting infrastructure and start looking like the center of the system. That's the idea I want to unpack here. And to do it properly, we need to step back from mining for a moment. Because what's happening to gold mills looks uncannily like what happens in every industry when infrastructure becomes scarce. Think about nuclear power plants, fractionators in energy markets, ports and rail hubs, data centers clustering around power, network density, cooling, and regulatory clearance. In all of those systems, the raw input is abundant or at least discoverable. The choke point is the hub, and once that hub exists, everything else reorganizes around it. If you stay with me for a few minutes, I want to show you how gold mills in Canada and Alaska have quietly become that kind of hub, and why that realization changes how you should think about value in this sector. The shift didn't come out of nowhere. Since roughly 2018, the gold industry has been pulled in two directions at once. On one side, grades have been trending lower, deposits deeper, more complex, and more expensive to mine. On the other, capital intensity has risen just as regulators have become more demanding. That combination makes efficiency at fixed assets decisive. If you already own a mill, you squeeze it harder. If you don't, you think very carefully before trying to build one. In Canada, the transition from CEAA 2012 to the Impact Assessment Act fundamentally changed the tone of permitting. It didn't make mining impossible, but it made greenfield projects slower, more uncertain, and far more sensitive to social and environmental narratives. In Alaska, federal permitting was already difficult, and litigation risk stretched timelines further. Programs like Fast 41 didn't make projects easier, they just made the delays more visible and predictable. The result in both jurisdictions was the same. Brownfields won, restarts won, expansions won. New mills became the exception, not the rule. Here's the part most people miss, and it's where the story starts to turn. When we talk about mills, we tend to focus on grinding horsepower or throughput rates. But across asset after asset, the real constraint isn't the mill itself, it's tailings. Tailings storage facility raises, new deposition plans, amendments that take years and can stop a project cold if they fail. You can buy another ball mill. You cannot casually buy another permitted valley to fill with tailings. That reality flips the hierarchy of value, or becomes optional. Permitted tailings volume does not. This is the moment where mills stop behaving like pieces of mining equipment and start behaving like strategic infrastructure. Think again about a nuclear plant. Its value isn't that uranium is rare. Uranium can be sourced globally. The value is that once the plant is permitted, built, connected to the grid, and politically accepted, it becomes irreplaceable. You don't replicate it just because demand increases. Demand routes to it. Gold mills are now playing the same role. Once a mill exists, with power, tailings, labor, and permits, it becomes a fixed node. Everything else becomes flexible. That's what people mean when they talk about hub-and-spoke milling, even if they don't always say it clearly. Data centers are a useful analogy. In theory, AI workloads can run anywhere. In practice, they concentrate around data centers with massive power access, cooling, network density, and regulatory clearance. Gold deposits are no different. Ore bodies exist all over the map, but production concentrates around mills that already have permission to operate. Once the hub exists, satellite feed suddenly becomes viable. Before that, it's stranded. Now let's make this concrete, because this is where the abstraction turns into insight. For years, Canadian Malartic was talked about as a mine. That framing is now outdated. As the open pit winds down and the Odyssey underground ramps up, the real asset isn't just the ounces underground, it's the mill. The complex has far more throughput capacity than Odyssey alone will require. In a traditional mindset, that excess looks inefficient. In an infrastructure mindset, it looks like a vacuum. Excess capacity attracts satellites. Nearby deposits and acquisitions that were marginal on a standalone basis suddenly matter because the hardest part of the system, the mill and its permits, is already in place. This is exactly how rail hubs work, exactly how ports work. Once capacity exists, traffic finds it. Detour Lake takes this logic even further. At that scale, the mill effectively is the system. Throughput is fixed, permitted, and enormous. The central question is no longer how many ounces are in the pit, but how do we feed this mill optimally for the next 20 years? That's why blending strategies matter more than headline grade. That's why underground development becomes relevant, not because it's flashy, but because it improves feed quality per ton. When the mill is the constraint, mining adapts to it, not the other way around. Now pause here, because this is where some listeners start to drift, thinking this only applies to majors. It doesn't. The implications for developers and juniors are just as important, and sometimes even more revealing. Côté Gold is a useful pivot point. It's one of the few large new mills built in this period, and it matters precisely because it worked. High-pressure grinding rolls, automation, energy efficiency, a disciplined ramp-up that exceeded nameplate. It proved that modern mill design can still be executed in the Canadian Shield. But the lesson isn't everyone should build a new mill. The lesson is how high the bar has become. Côté succeeded because capital, partners, technology, and permitting narrative all aligned. That's not a template most juniors can replicate. It's a reminder of why existing infrastructure has become so valuable. If you want the same story under harsher conditions, look north to Alaska. The logic doesn't change, it sharpens. Fort Knox survives not because the ore is extraordinary, but because the infrastructure is durable. Manh Choh only works because Fort Knox already exists. Without that mill, the deposit would likely be stranded. That's not a geological statement, it's a system statement. The same is true, at different scales, for Pogo and Kensington. Throughput grows only as far as permits and tailings allow. Everything else is secondary. At about this point in the conversation, here's the mental shift I want you to make. Stop thinking about restarts as second-tier assets. Start thinking about them as infrastructure arbitrage. Madsen is a perfect example. It's not huge, it's not new, but it has something most projects don't: a permitted mill in a proven camp. Restarting it isn't just about bringing ounces back online. It's a proof point that infrastructure, once permitted, can be revived far faster than it can be replaced. That signal matters more to capital than any single production forecast. It also explains why districts like Red Lake keep coming back decade after decade. The enduring advantage isn't just grade, it's infrastructure density. Hope Bay sits at the other end of the restart spectrum. It's not a quick flip, it's a deliberate pause and rethink. By dismantling and refurbishing, rather than rushing, the operator is effectively saying the district potential justifies getting the processing architecture right. That's not mine-by-mine thinking, that's infrastructure thinking, closer to redesigning a port than reopening a pit. Now let's talk about expansion, because this is where the tailings constraint becomes impossible to ignore. Blackwater is a master class in staged development. Start with a credible build, prove it works, expand in phases that align engineering, permitting, and financing. The value isn't just higher throughput, it's the compounding optionality that comes from staying inside a legible regulatory envelope. This is how infrastructure grows in the real world, incrementally, with regulators watching every step. Mount Poly tells the same story from another angle. Its future isn't dictated by how much rock it can crush. It's dictated by whether tailings storage can be safely and legally extended. The mill can only run as long as tailings have somewhere permitted to go. That's not a mining insight. That's a systems insight. Kensington in Alaska is a smaller but equally important hinge point. The geology didn't change. The upside didn't change. What matters is whether regulators approve higher throughput alongside waste and tailings solutions. That single decision determines whether the asset remains static or compounds in value. Again, infrastructure logic. If you're still with me, here's the next transition. Everything we've talked about so far explains why custom milling matters more than it appears on paper. Nicola's Merritt Mill is tiny compared to the giants, but its strategic value is outsized because it's permitted to process third-party feed. That makes it the mining equivalent of shared cloud infrastructure. High-grade, low-tonnage projects that could never justify their own mill suddenly become viable. This is how optionality gets unlocked at the margins, and it only works because the infrastructure already exists. Even Fort Knox, though not branded as a toll mill, plays the same role in practice. Existing mill, existing tailings, existing logistics. Satellite ore flows in. The hub persists. As we head toward the close, zoom out one last time. From 2018 to 2026, Canada and Alaska have taught the same lesson again and again. Mills concentrate value. Permits create moats. Tailings determine lifespan. Infrastructure attracts optionality. By 2030, the gold map in these jurisdictions will look less like a scatter of deposits and more like a network diagram. Nodes will matter. Edges will compete to connect. Before we wrap, I want to leave you with a few takeaways. Things you can actually carry forward the next time you look at a gold project, a junior press release, or a feasibility study. First, learn to spot false optionality early. When a company talks about future upside, ask one simple question: who controls processing? If the answer is, we'll figure it out later, or there's a mill nearby, or we expect excess capacity, that optionality is conditional. It depends on someone else's goodwill, permits that don't exist yet, or capital decisions outside management's control. Real optionality survives a single no. Conditional optionality collapses the moment one external decision goes the wrong way. Second, understand how juniors actually win without building mills. The most successful juniors aren't trying to become standalone producers. They're positioning themselves as the best possible feed source for existing infrastructure. Proximity to hubs matters more than sheer scale. High-grade, clean metallurgy matters more than tonnage. Toll milling isn't a compromise. It's a strategy. In this system, infrastructure density is destiny, and the smartest juniors design their path to value around that reality. Third, recognize why some assets never really die. Certain districts come back again and again, not because the geology magically improves, but because the infrastructure survives. Mills get restarted, tailings permits get amended, power and access remain. Red Lake, Malartic, Fairbanks, these places persist because infrastructure can outlast political cycles, management teams, and even decades of dormancy. When you see an asset in one of these districts, you're not just underwriting geology, you're underwriting a system that has already proven it can reboot. And finally, reframe how you read news. A drill intercept is interesting. A permit amendment is decisive. A mill restart is leverage. A tailings expansion is optionality becoming real. Once you start viewing gold through an infrastructure lens, the signal-to-noise ratio improves dramatically. That's the big shift this episode is about. Ounces matter, grades matter, jurisdictions matter. But in this cycle, permission matters more. That's the system. Everything else is commentary. You can read up on our full report focused on gold mills in Canada and Alaska at JuniorMining.gold, including the companies, the ticker symbols, and the future outlook. That's it for this week's dig. If you want more deep dives into the miners making moves, don't wait for the next episode. Get the data yourself at JuniorMining.gold. They are the leading edge for junior resource investors who want the truth without the fluff. I'm Dusty Nugget. Stay bold, stay scrappy, and I'll see you at the next drill site. You can learn more at JuniorMining.gold. Please like, subscribe, and visit our socials or our Substack for more content.